What's up everybody, Mark Green here from diabetesdietguide.com, and today we are talking about why we can't make our minds up about diet. Now this is a blog I've wanted to do for quite a while, and the reason for it is I just wanted to try and help plug the gap about why there's such a big gap between what the nutritional professionals might be saying compared to what you might read on social media and in the conventional media. Now in order to do this we need to look at a few different subjects, but one of those is going to be nutritional research, which is usually when a lot of people turn off when they hear the word research. But stick with me, because if you can get an understanding of this, you'll understand why there is such a misunderstanding around the subject of nutrition. Now the first thing to say is any nutritional professional that is particularly accountable, like dietitians, like myself, you know, we can actually be struck off if we're giving bad advice or trying to sell people things that they don't need. So we are not just making up our advice because it's our own opinion or we tried it with one person and it worked. We're looking at years of nutritional research and seeing what worked in different cohorts of patients. We're also then mixing that with years of experience working in practical settings, doing cross-learning across our peers and applying those learnings to our patients, trying to improve their health. Whereas what you find is, and I'm not saying this is everyone, in more conventional media or on the internet, people have more ulterior motives. They might want to sell you something. They'll have a diet plan that has a particular emphasis on it, a particular dietary methodology, and it doesn't matter what you present to them, they will discount anything that doesn't follow suit with what they're saying. Now that's not science, that's what we call biased. And if you have bias in science, then it's not reputable, it's not repeatable, and it's essentially not valid. So we would discount it. In fact, anyone that is talking about nutrition should actually be open-minded. You should be able to change their mind if you present them good evidence. And that's the foundation of where we start from when we're talking about nutrition. So just kicking off with our first point on the board here. So the first thing to kick off then on our list is the type of study. Now, I don't know if you can see this on the board, but at the top here we have bad studies, and at the bottom we have good studies, or we're getting really good down here. Okay, so there's lots of different types. The first type is a case study. Case study is when you look at one person, you apply an intervention and you see what happens. It might work, it might not. This is the poorest type of study because ultimately you're only looking at one person. You can't extrapolate that to anyone else or the wider population. It's a good starting point, but in terms of forming nutritional opinion, it's no good. Next on our list is cross-sectional studies. Now, these types of studies are designed to answer a specific question. So you might say, how many people in Southampton, where I live, have heart disease? And then you put that questionnaire out, you get your answer back, and that's the end of that. It doesn't give you any cause and effect, so again, it's not great in terms of actually nutritional research. Next on our list is case control studies. So these are good for actually comparing two groups of people and then working backwards to find out what might be the cause of their problem. So let's say we were looking at two groups of people. One group has type 2 diabetes, one group does not. Then you interview them and actually get them to do, say, a food frequency questionnaire. So they're recalling what they eat, generally speaking. And then we can start to identify the dietary habits amongst those groups to see if we can work backwards and identify the cause of what's caused the diabetes or prevented it. Now, as you can see, there's probably a lot of flaws with that because one, we're doing it from dietary recall, and two, just because certain factors start to pop up in the research, it doesn't mean that that's the cause. So again, in terms of cause and effect, this type of study design isn't great, but it's an improvement on the previous two. Then on the list we have cohort studies. So cohort studies are also called observational studies, where we look at populations of big groups of people and we do not do anything. We just sit back and watch what happens. So we observe their diets and their lifestyle, and then we see the sort of health outcomes that they have. Now you can compare that to other populations or different cohorts of people, hence the name cohort study, and then compare across them and see actually are there particular trends that lead to certain health outcomes. So this is the type of research that looked at, they used when they were looking at saturated fat intake. It's one that we use quite commonly in most studies actually looking at nutrition. And the problem is that there are a lot of different factors that might cause the problem that you're looking at. So for example, you might see that one group has a high intake of saturated fat and they have a high rate of cardiovascular disease. So the obvious thing to say is for saturated fat equals cardiovascular disease. Now it's beyond the scope of going into that. I have blogged on that before, so check out the YouTube channel or the blog if you have an interest. But they might also smoke, they might be physically inactive, they might not eat many vegetables. There might be a plethora of different factors that could also cause that outcome. So what then you have to start to do is work backwards. So we call this a regression analysis, where we start to eliminate different factors. So you take out all the smokers from your end point analysis, and you might take out all the people that exercise less than 30 minutes a day. And then suddenly you start to lower the numbers of people that you're looking at. And we'll talk about numbers in a minute, but ultimately you start to weaken the power of the study. Now we start getting to the business end. So you have an RCT, that's a randomized controlled trial. Now these are the best types of studies, and these can be randomized or non-randomized. So with randomized, it basically means you take a group of people, ideally they're matched, but like sex, weight, health, as many factors as possible, they are the same. And then you'll start to randomize them to the intervention group, i.e. take the pill, and to the non-intervention group, don't take the pill. Now the reason ideally they'll be randomized is because then that takes out the bias of the researchers, because they might have a tendency to put the people that are more likely to prove their point in the intervention group rather than the non-intervention group. So it just eliminates bias. Now what a randomized controlled trial does is it controls as many factors as physically possible to just show that the one point that they're focusing on in that trial actually has an impact or it doesn't, which is why this is used for things like medications, because we can basically say they're matched as closely as possible for all other factors. The only difference is this group took the pill, this group didn't, and let's have a look at the effect. So really good type of study. Now from a nutritional perspective, it's quite difficult because you can't just change one thing at a time. If I give one group more carbs, I'm also giving them more calories. So then if I want to match calories, I have to then reduce another macronutrient. So now I've started to adjust two factors, and I've had to adjust two factors in the other group that I'm comparing against. So it becomes very difficult to compare across studies when you're doing this. The other thing is, with diet, it takes years for diet to have an effect on your health, decades even. So if you're trying to control as many variables as possible, you basically have to tell people to follow a particular diet and live a certain way. And to be honest, after about 6 months, maybe a year maximum, people burn out and they fall out of the trial, and you end up with very low numbers completing the trial. So I've yet to see one RCT for diet that's lasted over a year, maybe 2 years tops. You're not going to get a 10-year study like this because people just won't stick to it. So it's almost impossible. So we have to almost rely on cohort and case control studies. It's the best we can do, and we're observing people in their natural habitat. Then, last but not least, we have meta-analysis. This is when we start to pull together all the research that's out there, ideally RCTs, and actually get an average of what happened. So this is a really good type of study because we're starting to pull the data together and get an idea of what the general consensus is for a particular subject. So that's the first point we need to think about. What type of study are we looking at? The next point on our list, and we'll kind of tie these three together, is how long is the study? What time are we talking about? Because obviously if you're just studying something for 2 months and we're looking at nutrition where it takes decades for it to have an effect, it's not going to be a great overall representation of what that nutritional intervention is going to do for you. Maybe if you're looking at things like weight loss, then yeah, it can have some informative information because people can lose weight in 2 months, but also with nutrition, you know, we're looking at long-term sustainability. If I just told you to eat broccoli for a month, you're going to lose weight. Does that mean it's a good weight loss method? Yes. Does it mean it's a good diet long term? No. Also, the number of participants. How many people are we looking at? The more people you have in the trial, the better, because then you can apply it to the wider population. If I have one person in the study, like the case control study, you know, what works for them, it might not necessarily work for the 65 million other people in the UK. So the wider population we have, the more chance we're going to get a true representation of the group you're trying to look at. Also, the quality of the study and the methodology. Just because it's published, it does not mean it's a good method. So don't get me wrong, you need to meet certain quality standards in order to get your paper published, but not all papers are created equal. There's something called an impact factor. So an impact factor is actually how highly rated is that journal. So I could write a journal article for publication and it will be rejected by 99% of all publications out there, and then the final 1% will accept it. So does that mean it's a good article? Not really. And actually it's not going to be very impactful. So something like Nature, which is a journal article, has an impact factor of around 60 plus. Now, for an article generally to be considered good, it needs to be over 10. I'm sure there's leeway in that. But to give you an idea, the Clinical Nutrition Journal, which a lot of these articles are published about nutrition, has an impact factor of 6. So it's below that threshold of 10 and it's way below Nature. So seeing an article in Clinical Nutrition with a low impact factor, with a small number of participants, with a poor methodology over 6 months, and it was a case control trial, suddenly you can start to see someone like myself, they'll read it, they'll take from it what they can, but it's not a great article in terms of then changing practice. So you'd need a whole bunch of those over many years to then start to get an idea of actually what's working for patients. And then just picking up on that point, you also have the personal interpretation. And this is where going to uni and actually getting some training about how to interpret this stuff comes into play, because you should be able to pick apart any journal article and actually say what was good and what was bad, and then based on that you can weigh the pros and cons, and I basically get the balance of the article about whether or not it's something you should be listening to. Whereas someone who doesn't have that grounding, that background knowledge, will look at any article, they'll look at a case control study with 5 people in it in a terrible impact journal, and they'll take that as gospel. And that happens a lot with diets, and often when I've had, not so much debates, because I don't really get into debates, but when I've had discussions on social media about different dietary trends and maybe they're pushing incorrect advice that could be dangerous for certain patients, they'll often reference really poorly designed journals, and you go and you read them and you just think, come on, it's not good science, but you can't talk to them because they haven't got that grounding. And finally, the last point I just wanted to talk about is what's the focus of the diet as well, because really what we do with nutrition and particularly diet is we always seem to focus on weight loss. It's always about weight loss. Yeah, so keto diet, I lost X amount of pounds on this diet, or plant-based, I've never been healthier because I lost 16 pounds on that diet. You know, there's a bigger picture at hand in terms of overall holistic health, which is what dietitians like myself are focusing on. Yes, weight's important, of course it is, and it feeds into your overall health profile, but it's not the be all and end all. As I said earlier, if I just told you to eat broccoli or eggs, you're going to lose weight, but it doesn't mean the diet's balanced, it doesn't mean you're getting everything that you need, and ultimately it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be healthy. In fact, you might lose weight, but it might increase your risk of something else. Like if you only ate eggs, you're not getting your fruit and vegetables in, you've got a very low fiber intake, you're not getting all your vitamins and minerals, and we know that people that have low intakes of vegetables and fruit actually have higher rates of cancer and cardiovascular disease. So actually, yeah, you might have lost a bit of weight, but you might have increased your risk elsewhere, which is why time and time again, you hear messages about having a healthy, balanced diet, which generally resembles the Mediterranean diet, whatever interpretation you have of that, because there's no specific interpretation. That's what we mean by a balanced diet, looking at the overall picture. How are we trying to find that sweet spot between balancing, getting the optimal weight, as well as reducing your risk of disease long term. And there you have it, guys. So that is a whistle-stop tour about why we can't agree on diets. So hopefully you found that interesting. There's lots of points and I've kind of rushed through it a little bit because I'm just conscious of time and actually trying to hold your attention. Well, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you found that useful. If you did find it useful, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, or turn on the bell if you want to get notifications about when I publish. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour, admittedly, but hopefully you took something from it and actually have a bit of a better understanding about why we can't make our minds up about diets, and actually in future you'll be able to spot people that might not necessarily have a good grounding with this kind of stuff. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you later.